The people who believe that it was this great civilization, they extol the virtues of this giant empire that used to exist to the point that Napoleon and the Tsar had to team up to destroy them. But it's weird because even the debunking stuff doesn't admit what the CIA document does. That these people did exist at some point. And that the Soviet Union made a concentrated effort to remove them, to change their history, to rewrite it. The thing that trips me out most about the Grand Tatar Empire, however you want to call it, is that this is episode what, like 183, 184? I've debunked a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of iceberg conspiracy theories where I say, I don't think this is true, but this is what I think the theory is. Let's just put on our little imagination caps and run with it. But this one, not the mud flood again, that part's ridiculous, but the idea that there was a nation that was wiped off the planet and out of the history books. And if you ask me right now, dismissing the mud flood, I think that's been thoroughly debunked, but if you asked me right now, Jason, do you believe that there used to be a nation in Europe called Tatar with its own culture, people, uniforms, flags, language, that covered most of the continent and was wiped off the map and out of the history books since 1860? Jason, do you believe that conspiracy theory? I have to honestly answer with, I don't know. DeadRabbitRadio@gmail.com is going to be your email address. You can also hit us up at Facebook.com/DeadRabbitRadio. Twitter is @JasonOCarpenter. Dead Rabbit Radio is the daily paranormal conspiracy and true crime podcast. You don't have to listen to it every day, but I'm glad you listened to it today. Have a great one, guys. It's funny, yesterday's episode that I did a classics of, Sam the Sandown Clown, I said I would have never chosen that episode to be a classics episode. Not that the episode wasn't good. It's because what I was mentally going through because of the episode. This is the same thing, actually. It's very, very interesting that you guys have picked these episodes. Yesterday, Cole, Danielle, and Tommy Davidson picked Sam the Sandown Clown. Today, Cantillians picked this one. But this one was different. Sam the Sandown Clown, I was in a different mental space. I didn't know if I was going to be able to continue to find stuff for the show. It was actually later than this episode as well. At this point in the show, we're still having a pretty easy time finding stories. This episode, I think, is, not to pat myself on the back, this is a great episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I have not listened to this episode since I recorded it. I was super frustrated recording it. I had a really hard time behind the scenes. Not necessarily mentally like I did with yesterday's episode, Sam the Sandown Clown, but the episode was so long and so dense. I remember this episode came out on a Sunday night, and it took so much work, it was exhausted by the end of it. And not just the research, like the story I tell in the research, the story where I'm like, you know, I had to turn, it was my buddy Carson. I was using a fake name back then for Mitchum, but my buddy Carson, I remember going to him and being like, how is this real? I remember this was one of the episodes I did so much research on. And I loved doing the research, but it was so dense. I cover the mud flood and Tartaria, which both of those subjects have hour-long documentaries on YouTube about. And I remember the episode was much, much longer. Back then, I had a hard 35-minute rule. The episode had to be 35 minutes long. There were a few times I would go over that if I really had to. And nowadays I've actually lengthened it. No one's really said anything or noticed or cared. Maybe they do notice, but they like it. Now I have a hard limit of 40 minutes. I've given, after 600 episodes now, I give myself an extra 5 minutes to play. A lot of the episodes still come in early, but the episode works for me so well. I think it's very, very complicated topics. And I think that it's presented... This whole behind-the-scenes thing isn't just talking about how much I think the episode's great, but it's just a little bit because I got to go into something else. I remember when I was re-listening to it, I was like, wow, this episode fully explains and backs up with evidence It fully explains the mud flood, like what the theory is, and then explains what the evidence is. And then it does the same thing with Tartaria. It says, here's the conspiracy theory, here's the proof that Tartaria used to exist, that it was this Muslim country. It wasn't this high-tech Atlantean country. And then there's a funny segment at the beginning about the Honey Swamp Island monster, about this hoax that became a child's doll. I think this might be one of the best episodes of Dead Rabbit Radio ever. This episode completely fell under the radar for me, so thank you, Cantillans. This, which is a funny episode, I really like that episode. Mormon Bigfoot, those are easy things to say and it gets people's attention. But the Great Mud Flood, this episode, and it's funny because I can't really call it that. I'll explain that in a second, probably. But Was the World Destroyed in the 1860s is a great episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. And I remember, though, when I was done editing it, it was one of those episodes that I never wanted to listen to again. It took so much work to get this episode out that I was so frustrated. And I have to say that everything I left on the cutting room floor, you could go, oh, there's more information out there. It most likely sucked. It most likely, if those facts suck. It was a problem. A lot of times the editing is I'm cutting out really bad jokes. And then I'm doing multiple takes. Because for the most part, these episodes are recorded in just one shot. Sometimes if there's an audio problem or if something's really off, I'll stop and come back hours later. But for the most part, I may repeat certain facts over and over again until I get it right. Don't do that with pronunciations, by the way. But I try to keep it as free form as possible. I try not to do that a lot. Usually it's the endings that I do repeats on, because that's where I'm trying to wrap up a narrative. Usually it's not like I repeat a fact wrong. Like if I make a mistake in the episode and I catch it, I'll edit that out. But I just remember this episode being such a nightmare to edit and to craft and to try to fit all this information into 35 minutes. And I think it's one of the best episodes of Dead Rabbit Radio. As much as it sucked mentally for me to do it, I got it done. I remember also I was super busy with personal stuff as well at this time. So I didn't want to, when I saw this pop up, when Cantillians recommended it, I was like, oh, that episode, it's probably super boring. I haven't listened to it in a long time. And we'll give it a shot. We'll listen to it. And I listened to it and I go, this might be in the top 10 best Dead Rabbit Radio episodes. Because it has the funny story at the beginning and then it has the hard story at the end. And I like that juxtaposition. The funny story kind of gets you in. You're like, oh, yeah, I've never heard of the Honey Island Swamp Monster. Oh, it's a monster high doll that's funny, cracking these jokes. And then, bam, it goes into really investigative stuff about a topic that's all over the conspiracy theory world. The Great Mud Flood is big in the conspiracy theory world. So I'm a huge fan of this episode now. So, Cantillians, I think you picked this. One last note. I think it's interesting because I try to limit like the stress I'm going through from leaking into the show. I can hear it, see. When this episode was recommended, when Sam the Sandown Clown was recommended, I knew exactly. I was like, I remember the mental state I was in recording those episodes. Some episodes, like the one about the Russians turning into pillars, the UFO, I was actually upset. That wasn't a bit. I was upset that my time was being wasted. It was Friday episodes tend to be a little more freewheeling to begin with. I'm a little more exasperated on. That's not how you pronounce it, but I'm not doing another take on Fridays because it's been a long week. Now, sometimes I bulk record episodes. I may record a couple episodes in a day, which actually makes me even more tired, but it gives me more time to research, so it's like you have to choose. And you go, well, Jason, you say you're having a great day, but you're recording 3 episodes in a day. Well, you know what? When you're listening to that episode, I can almost guarantee I'm having a great day. So yeah, that is the behind the scenes for the episode, Was the World Destroyed in the 1860s? It was a lot of work to get this episode out, and I didn't appreciate it at the time. I just figured it was one of 633 episodes. Because that's how I look at it. Like, I love doing this show, but I'll record an episode, I gotta move on to the next one. There's very few episodes that stand out to me. They either stand out to me because they were a lot of fun to cover, which even the Hans one, if you listen to the Classics episode, behind the scenes for the Hans one, that was a nightmare. That was the second or third draft of that episode. Like, that wasn't me just doing takes. That was me straight up scrapping 30 minutes of recording and being like, this sucks, this is horrible, the show's done. So maybe out of that stuff, I think this is one of the best episodes of Dead Rabbit Radio. Like, this is going to start to be an episode that I'm going to recommend to people. I think the presentation's great, and I think I was just so frustrated with the behind-the-scenes stuff that I totally forgot how good it was. This sounds like I'm totally patting myself on the back. I don't want it to come off that way. If I was a listener of this show, I would be like, wow, this is... I guess what I'm saying is, I know what I was going through mentally, and I had completely written off this episode. I never wanted to hear it again. So it means a lot to me that you guys listened to it and enjoyed it. Because that means that hard work and that mental struggle was worth it. So... there you go. I'll try not to pat myself on the back anymore. That was episode 182, was The World Destroyed in the 1860s. That is one that I've actually clipped out and put on YouTube. I don't do that much anymore. I really don't do it at all. But I think this episode is just so full of information, that story about the Mud Flood in Tartaria, that if you know anyone who believes in those conspiracy theories, direct them to this video. I think that it answers a ton of questions. So... that was that one, and we are going to have another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio Classics tomorrow. I hope you will be back. That one might actually give you an ability to change your life. See you guys then. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio Classics, where we take a look at a classic episode with some new information. On Monday, we covered episode 13. So 13 is lower than 72. That was an earlier one. But 13 was just 3 weeks in. We've let the show grow for a month or two at this point. 72 episodes, probably about 3 or 4 months. So there's some interesting insights going into this episode. This episode was recommended by Marcus Clausen. And Marcus actually recommended this episode twice. That's how badly he wants to hear this episode be repeated. So I'm going to present the episode to you now. If you've already heard it, you can jump to the end. But I think there's some interesting information you may want to listen to again. This is episode 72, Hypersigils. Was there really an internet game that encouraged its players to commit suicide? And can magic help you get the life you've always dreamed of? Today on Dead Rabbit Radio. Hey everyone, welcome back to Dead Rabbit Radio. My name is Jason Carpenter. I'm having a great day. I hope you're having a great day too. Episode 72. This is crazy that it's actually lasted this long. And not to be fair, no. Not that it's lasted this long, but that I've kept doing it this long. It's awesome. I'm very, very proud of myself. We're actually which, you should always be proud of yourself, but we're actually doing great. Thank you so much for everyone who's downloading the show, listening to it. It's phenomenal. We are hitting the tipping point where now it's just getting subscribers and getting new downloads every day. So I appreciate that. And really, that plays into our second story. So I currently have a friend who's having trouble with mice in her house. Now, I'm not going to say who it is because she would beat me up. But, the traditional answer is you have mice in your house. People say, well, get a cat. Cat will eat the mice. Or cats, however many mice you have. Apparently she has a lot. That actually works with other species as well. I used to eat a ton of rice. Pounds and pounds of rice. It's really cheap, and it's filling, and I love it, and I always mix it with chili or Taco Bell or whatever. It's basically just a filler food. What I didn't know was that in rice, and correct me if I'm wrong, I probably am, I don't know if this is exactly where they came from, but in rice, there are little bugs called rice weevils, like eggs, basically. So, and again, people are like, that's not how it works, Jason, that's not how it works. But this is what I was told happens. If you cook rice and don't eat all of it, and you let it sit out for a while, the rice weevil eggs hatch. And so you get these little bugs that fly around your apartment. Now, that sequence of events happened quite often, where I would cook rice, I wouldn't eat all of it, I would leave the bowl out, and these bugs, these little rice weevils, began to infest not this apartment. This was years and years ago. I don't want people going, I'm never coming over to your apartment again, Jason. Anyway, so I'd get these rice weevils flying around. And they pretty much limit themselves to the kitchen or wherever there was rice before. Maybe they show up to eat the rice. I don't know. That's not the point. Anyways, I had rice weevils everywhere. And then one summer, the rice weevils were gone. But my sanitary habits didn't change.
So I was like, I wonder where all those rice weevils at. But I had an infestation of ants. Not an infestation, but I had a lot of ants in my kitchen. Because again, not cleaning up. And so I was like, oh man, I got all these ants. Oh man, no peace, of course. I could have just